You wake up to something crawling on your face. Again, it's small, ticklish, and not at all shy. It knows your skin better than your spouse. It is, of course, an insect. And no, you don't get to smack it. Because it's 1347, your bedding is stuffed with straw, and frankly, it's doing better than you are. The good news is, this is just another morning in medieval Europe. The bad news? You're about to spend the next several hours trying to figure out if that itch is a flea bite, a lice colony, or the first symptom of the plague. Spoiler, it's all free. The mattress smells like betrayal. Moldy hay, soaked in the sweat of 6 previous owners. You roll over and catch a whiff of something that's probably dead but could just be your feet. Insects are not just a problem here, they are your roommates. Your tiny, 6-legged, blood-sucking roommates who never pay rent and always show up for dinner. So before you get comfortable, or as comfortable as one can be in a wool tunic that hasn't seen soap since the Crusades, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing who's falling asleep to the sound of medieval suffering. It's like group therapy, but with buboes and bug bites. Anyway, let's get one thing very clear, medieval life wasn't quiet. It wasn't peaceful. And it definitely wasn't hygienic. But somehow, against all odds and every known parasite, people lived. They adapted. They scratched. And they occasionally snapped and set their bedding on fire because, honestly, how many fleas is too many fleas? That's not a rhetorical question. In medieval times, the answer was somewhere north of 3,000. You throw off your wool blanket, which is about as soft as sandpaper and twice as flammable. It doesn't help. More bugs scatter. You're not sure if they're lice or just very bold beetles. Either way, you've got work to do, and nothing ruins your productivity like your own skin trying to escape your body. Your morning hygiene routine is ambitious, considering the circumstances. There is no soap, not really. The local apothecary sells something resembling soap, but it's made from leftover animal fat, ash, and the kind of herbs that scream, "I gave up." You rub a bit of it between your hands and pretend that it's helping, even though the lice are now just swimming in grease and laughing at you in tiny, high-pitched choral arrangements. You step outside your wooden hovel and instantly regret it. The air is thick with the smell of livestock, burning dung, and that unique medieval perfume known as people. Flies orbit your head like lazy satellites. A mosquito lands on your neck, and you slap it so hard you give yourself a concussion. Worth it. People in your village aren't too concerned about bugs, mostly because they've got bigger problems, like famine and war, and the church threatening to excommunicate your goats. But deep down, everyone has accepted that insects are just part of life, like taxes, or spontaneous fire, or your neighbor, Gregor, who insists that drinking boiled onion juice will cure leprosy. It won't. It'll just make you smell like soup. Still, some people try to fight back. There's the monk who spends his afternoons reading scripture and picking fleas out of his robe like it's an Olympic sport. There's the lady down the road who swears by lavender bundles, which do smell nice but mostly just make your bed smell like floral failure. And then there's you. You've decided to try something new today, a vinegar bath. You heard about it from a guy whose cousin's uncle's bishop swears it kills lice. You pour the vinegar, well, something vaguely vinegary, into a wooden tub that leaks like your neighbor's moral compass. You lower yourself into the cold, stinging liquid and immediately regret every decision that led to this moment. The vinegar doesn't kill the lice. It gives them a spa day. They throw a party on your scalp. There's a conga line. Now, before you get too itchy just listening to this, it's worth noting that medieval insects weren't just annoying, they were medical indicators. A constant presence, yes, but also a warning sign. If someone had too many lice, you knew they were sick, or dying, or French. And fleas? Fleas weren't just a nuisance. They were the black-robed horsemen of the apocalypse in miniature form. They carried Yersinia pestis, a name that sounds like a forgotten Roman emperor but is actually the plague bacterium. One bite from a flea, and congratulations, your body is now a petri dish. Of course, you don't know that. Not yet. Germ theory won't exist for another 500 years, and until then, you're just going to keep blaming bad smells, planetary alignments, and too much sadness in the spleen. You dry off using a linen cloth that hasn't been dry since the harvest festival. Your skin feels like pickled leather. The lice, undeterred, return to their homes behind your ears. You dress in your one tunic. It's made of wool. It's always made of wool, even in summer, especially in summer. You wonder briefly if the itching is a sign of divine punishment. It is, but not from God, from the sheik. Outside, the village is alive with scratching. A mun sneezes so hard he loses a tooth. A child smacks her brother with a ladle because he borrowed her lice comb. This is normal. This is daily life. Insects are so baked into your existence that your language has evolved to accommodate them. There's a word for the specific sensation of bed bugs marching up your spine. There's a different word for the aggressive thump of a horsefly hitting your forehead. Neither of these words translates into modern English, but both sound a lot like creative swearing. It's time for breakfast, which is, generously, a crust of bread so hard it might qualify as a weapon. You dip it in something watery and vaguely brown. It's either beer or broth or rainwater. You're not picky. The bread has weevils in it. You eat them anyway. They add protein and crunch. You take a moment to reflect. You are itchy. You are tired. Your clothes are damp. Your house is filled with tiny vampires. But you are alive. And that's not nothing. In a world where childbirth is a gamble and stairs are deadly, waking up with bugs instead of bubonic boils is basically winning the lottery. You remember that the town physician, a man with the medical training of a squirrel, once suggested roasting rosemary to drive bugs away. So you try it. You toss some dried rosemary onto the hearth, and it smokes like a disappointed dragon. The scent is pleasant. The bugs don't care. One of them winks at you. At the market, you overhear a woman talking about bedbug poison. You lean in. It turns out she means boiling water. Which, fair. If your mattress is 80% insect biomass, you'll try anything. You return home, exhausted, bitten, emotionally betrayed. You crawl back into your straw-stuffed prison and pull the blanket over your head. You wonder if the itching will ever stop. It won't. But you get used to it. You scratch in your sleep. You scratch in your dreams. This is life in the Middle Ages, where luxury is a day without a flea bite, and happiness is a brief moment when your scalp is between infestations. You wake up again. This time, there is no gentle sunrise, no birdsong, just a quiet, crawling panic as you realize something is moving inside your hair. It isn't your imagination. It's never your imagination. It's lice. They live here now. They have built communities. They have names. They have tiny, medieval societies under your scalp and probably some kind of feudal tax system. You are not just infested. You are colonized. You sit up, slowly, because moving too fast in your condition causes your tunic to rub against your skin in ways that violate the Geneva Convention. Of course, the Geneva Convention won't exist for another 600 years, but if it did, there would be clauses about wool, friction, and bugs in your eyebrows. You reach up to scratch, but then stop yourself. Not because you don't want to. You do. Dear God, you do. But because yesterday you scratched until you bled, and that just gave the lice more territory. They are aggressive. They are organized. If you listen closely, you can hear the sound of little medieval drums. You run your fingers through your hair. 1 louse. 2 lice. 3 lice. A village. A plague. A social uprising. Your scalp is a medieval allegory. And you are the monarch, powerless, itchy, and vaguely flammable. Now, lice were not just tolerated in the Middle Ages. They were expected. Like taxes or poor dental hygiene. They were so common that people didn't even bother pretending they weren't there. Public delousing was an acceptable pastime. People would sit in church and casually flick lice off each other's shoulders between prayers. It was bonding. It was intimate. It was revolting. You remember that time old brother Odo found a particularly large one on his tunic and declared it a sign from God. He kept it in a jar for a week, gave it a name, probably tried to baptize it. Because here's the thing, in medieval logic, everything meant something. Lice, divine punishment, or a test of faith. Or, if you're lucky, just the price you pay for being alive and clothed. Sometimes they were considered a sort of natural penance. The Lord giveth, people said, and the Lord infesteth. You know, for character development. You make your way to the wooden bucket outside. It's not a bath. It's a statement. A moist, splinter-filled statement about how little dignity you possess. You splash your face, hoping the cold water will shock the lice into leaving. It doesn't. They've built tunnels. They've prepared for siege. You reach for your lice comb. Or rather, what passes for a lice comb, a small, flat stick with notches crudely carved into it. If you're lucky, a traveling merchant might sell actual metal-toothed combs, expensive, rare, and surprisingly ineffective. But your version is a family heirloom. It's been passed down for generations. Along with the lice, combing your hair is a process. You sit in the sun, parting sections like an overworked shepherd managing an unruly flock. You squint. You pluck. You squish. And this isn't a private affair. Your neighbor walks by and greets you like this is just another Tuesday. Because it is. You're just a person sitting in front of your hovel, killing insects in your own hair. No one judges. In fact, she offers to help. You decline. You have boundaries. Thin, porous, crumbling boundaries. You remember that one time when the local priest gave a sermon about vanity. He said lice were God's way of humbling the proud. Then he spent the entire second half of the sermon picking them out of his beard with the concentration of a monk illuminating a manuscript. The crowd respected that. God works in mysterious and incredibly itchy ways. Now, occasionally, someone would try to fight back with something resembling medicine. Garlic paste, vinegar rubs, urine rinses. Yes, human urine. Yours, or someone else's. Because in medieval Europe, the line between folk remedy and outright psychological break was very, very thin. You tried the garlic once. It just made the lice smell Italian. You tried the vinegar, but all it did was make your head smell like a salad. A very sad, screaming salad. And the urine? You don't want to talk about the urine. You scratch again. You pluck. You squint. You stare at a louse between your fingernails. It is tiny, white, determined. You feel a weird kind of respect for it. Like a bitter rival. If it were a person, it would be the kind of man who corrects your Latin grammar in front of your crush. You flick it into the fire. You hear the faintest sizzle. Victory. Temporary. Your scalp still itches. Later in the day, you're sitting with your fellow villagers under the tree where public beatings happen and grain is sometimes weighed, the town square, essentially. Everyone is scratching. Everyone is talking about lice. Brother Odo is still talking about his louse. It's gone now. Probably escaped. Probably spreading doctrine. One woman claims she has a secret recipe, crushed juniper berries mixed with ashes and something that might be pigeon blood. You nod politely and pretend to write it down, but mostly you're just thinking about what else might be living in your socks. Because lice are not just for hair. Oh no. They go where the heat is. Armpits. Waistbands. Seams. The soft underbelly of your existence. They are loyal. They follow you from tunic to tunic like tiny arthropodic stalkers. And if you have clothes, you have lice. Clothes weren't washed often. And when they were usually just beaten against rocks in a river and laid out to dry in the sun while everyone stood nearby, watching their undergarments flap like tiny, shameful flags. Lice loved this. They took it as a challenge. You could bake a tunic in direct sunlight until it smoked, and somehow, they would still crawl out like, oh, was that supposed to bother us? Occasionally, you would delouse your clothes with fire. You'd hold them over a flame, and hope the heat drove the lice out before it drove the fire in. If you were unlucky, the lice won. If you were very unlucky, the tunic lost. You still remember that day. Goodbye, old friend. You were mostly holes anyway. The wealthier classes had their own ways of coping. Some noblemen would shave their heads entirely and wear wigs. Not because it was fashionable, but because lice had grown so overwhelming that the only real solution was baldness and lies. And those wigs? Also infested. Probably worse. You lie down in a field for a while. It's peaceful. The grass is damp. The sky is a soft, indifferent gray. You think, briefly, about reincarnation. If you come back as anything, please let it not be a medieval louse. But also, respect. They have thrived where so many have failed. Empires have fallen. Popes have been overthrown. But lice? Eternal. unbothered, on your head. Later that night, you're in bed. Again, your blanket doesn't do much. It's coarse. It's drafty. And now, with the darkness, the lice grow bold. You can feel them moving, crawling, digging trenches, hosting tiny banquets, playing chess. You reach for your comb, but it's too late. You're tired, defeated. You lie there, very still, and wonder if lice can hear your thoughts. They can. And they're laughing. Still, you drift off to sleep. Eventually, because exhaustion is stronger than discomfort, and dreams are louder than scratching. And tomorrow you meet bedbugs. And you will wish, with every fiber of your flea-bitten soul, that lice were the worst of it. You lie awake. It's the middle of the night. The fire in the hearth has died down to a reluctant glow, barely illuminating the timber beams above your head. The air is damp. The blanket is damp. Your soul is damp. And something is biting you. Not the poetic bitten by dreams kind. No, this is actual biting. The kind that draws blood. The kind that makes you question whether you've wronged an ancient forest spirit in a past life. You shift your leg. Too late. The bite already happened. And now it's swelling. Another welt. One more mark in the eternal, invisible war between you and the mattress. Because yes, they live in the mattress. You don't have a mattress, exactly. Not like the ones in modern hotels where they promise you won't be eaten alive. Your bed is a burlap sack filled with hay, moss, straw, and maybe the leftover regret of a goose. It smells like wet shoes and seasonal depression. It's softish, but mostly itchy. And absolutely alive. Bed bugs. Cimex lectularius. Latin for your sleep is now cancelled. They are flat, reddish-brown, and horrifyingly resourceful. Nocturnal by nature. Vampiric by choice. And unlike lice, who at least have the decency to hang out where you can see them, bedbugs are sneakier. They wait. They plot. And when the fire goes out and you finally start to drift off, that's when the feast begins. One crawls up your calf, slow and deliberate. Another emerges from the seam of your bedding like a tiny landlord inspecting its property. They go for the soft spots. Ankles, wrists, elbows. The bits of you exposed to air because your medieval blanket, lovingly woven from questionable wool, is smaller than your body and smells faintly of goat. You can try to swat at them, but you won't catch them. They vanish like secrets into the stitching. You slap yourself in the dark and just end up bruising your thigh. You whisper a prayer. Not for protection. For vengeance. You sit up in bed, squinting into the firelight. The embers flicker. Shadows dance across the wooden walls. Something scurries. It might be a beetle. Or a mouse. Or a hallucination. You stop checking. Before we go any further, if you're still awake, somehow, this is probably a good time to ask you to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments what time it is for you and where you're watching from. I love hearing where you're tuning in from. Bonus points if you're lying in bed, ideally in a bug-free one. You shift your bedding. Bad idea. You just stir the nest. The thing about medieval bed bugs is that they were not just unwanted guests. They were housemates, permanent residents, squatters with boundary issues. You didn't get bed bugs, you were born into them. Like a cursed inheritance. Your bed was made of straw, and straw is basically just a 5-star resort for insects. It offers everything: cover, insulation, edible fungus, and other insects to hang out with. Sometimes you'd add feathers or rags or old tunics to make it softer. Congratulations, you just created a condo complex for vermin. Now, you might wonder, surely people tried to get rid of them? They did. Poor souls. They tried everything. Smoke, fire, ashes, boiling water. You name it. One particularly bold method involved setting the entire mattress on fire, killing the bugs, and then sleeping on a scorched patch of earth instead. The bugs always came back. Like tax collectors. Or ex-boyfriends. There were even manuals written about them. Medieval text describing pestilences of the bed, a polite way of saying every night is a buffet, and you are the entree. Remedies included sprinkling fine sand in your bed, placing dried herbs in your mattress, or rubbing garlic oil into the seams. That last one didn't work. You just ended up bitten and smelling like an angry salami. Herbs were popular, though. Pennyroyal, wormwood, lavender, rue, all the greatest hits. People stuff them into their mattresses, their pillows, their nightcaps, basically turning their beds into salad bars that disappointed both humans and insects equally. You tried lavender once. It masked the smell for a bit. Then the bugs returned with a vengeance. One of them actually bit you on the eyelid. You saw stars. You named him Gregory. You still think about Gregory. In noble households, they had more elaborate strategies. Servants would air out the bedding daily. This meant beating it with sticks until bugs came flying out like popcorn. The bedding would then be draped over hedges or clotheslines, in the vain hope that sunlight might shame the bugs into leaving. It never worked. Even royalty wasn't safe. King Henry IV of France famously complained about the verminous torment in his bed. He had a staff dedicated to fumigation, which involved setting small fires near the bed to smoke the bugs out. Yes, royal arson. And still, they came back. Because bed bugs are the Jason Voorhees of medieval pest life. They disappear. They come back. They bring friends. And they do not die easily. You lie back down. You've accepted your fate. It's fine. You'll just scratch. Maybe cry softly. Maybe fantasize about reincarnation again. Something without skin. Like a rock. Or a spoon. But then you remember something else. Something worse. You're not sleeping alone. You share your mattress with your siblings, and maybe your parents, and possibly the goat, which means there are more hosts, which means more bugs, which means, yes, they're mobile. They migrate. What started as a casual nibble on your ankle becomes a full-scale invasion, a crawling, itchy, invisible procession. You are the Appalachian Trail of blood meals. You are a buffet, a pilgrimage site, a top-rated Yelp destination for ancient insects. And the scratching begins. Everyone's doing it. It's communal now. Your brother is twitching. Your mother is muttering something that might be a prayer or a curse. The goat sneezes. You pull the blanket over your head. Bad idea. Bedbugs love darkness. You're sweating. Your scalp is oily. You are emitting what medieval bugs perceive as luxury. They are feasting. You're like Versailles for insects. The bites burn, then itch, then burn again. You scratch until your skin flakes. Somewhere in your mind, you vaguely remember the concept of hygiene. It seems quaint now. In the morning, you'll find the welts. Rows of them. Lines. Patterns. You'll look at them like a farmer inspecting crops. Or a prisoner counting tally marks. You'll compare them to your siblings. See who the bugs like more. It's always a competition. And no matter what you do, how you scrub, burn, air out, or pray, they will return. Because they always do. They were here before you. They will be here after you. They are the true rulers of the medieval bedroom. And as you finally give in to sleep, slow, scratchy, and slightly delusional, you hear one last whisper from the shadows beneath the bed. You wake up. Not because of the sunlight. Not because of a rooster. Not because of any rational, healthy reason a person should wake up. You wake up because something bit you. Again. You don't scream. You're past that. You just groan. Softly. Like a man who knows he's already lost the war and is just trying to survive until breakfast. You reach down and scratch your shin. It's swollen. Lumpy. Somehow wet. Congratulations. The fleas are back. You lift your blanket. 3 jump. Fleas. You sigh like a 14th century pope realizing that sin is real and his shoes are full of rats. You were just starting to fall asleep, too. But no. Not in this house. Not on this straw mattress. Not in this cursed, flea-loving century. The fleas, unlike lice or bedbugs, don't wait for night. They don't hide. They don't crawl. They leap. Athletes. Acrobatics. Cirque du Soleil for bloodsuckers. They are the gymnasts of insect hell. You glance down at your ankles again. More bites. Red. Angry. Festering. Perfectly spaced, like they're trying to leave a message. Some kind of Morse code in itch form. And it's not just you. Your sister is scratching. Your cousin, who sleeps by the hearth, is scratching. Even the chicken in the corner, technically not even allowed in the house, is scratching. Because fleas do not discriminate. They are tiny, equal opportunity tormentors. They bite the rich, the poor, the peasant, the pope, the pig, and the priest. You throw back the blanket in disgust, revealing a cloud of hopping dots. One lands on your knee. You swat. You miss. It laughs. It does a flip. You live in a plague simulator. And now you remember what your mother said, as she picked another flea off the back of your neck and squashed it with the quiet resignation of someone who's done this her whole life. Fleas are just part of living. No, they're not. But they were. In medieval Europe, fleas were like air. Ubiquitous. Invisible. Essential, apparently. They lived in the straw. In the hay. In the animals. In your hair. In your beds. In your clothing. In your skin folds. You were never alone. You just hoped the fleas weren't hungry. Spoiler, they were always hungry. Now fleas, unlike lice or bedbugs, don't need you to sit still. They're portable. They go with you. They leap aboard and treat your body like a carnival ride. You are the Uber. And they don't tip. You pull your tunic over your head and shake it out. 5 fleas fall to the floor. You crush one. It pops. You feel weirdly victorious. But there's always another. Always. You scratch your arm absent-mindedly while trying to remember which old herbal remedy worked best last time. Was it elderflower? Rue? Ground capones? Wait, no. That one was for demons. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. You once tried soaking your feet in vinegar. Your feet smelled like pickles and your bites still itched. You once boiled your undergarments. The fleas still came back. The water turned gray. The tub died of embarrassment. You even tried sleeping standing up once, thinking maybe the fleas wouldn't find you. They did. They always do. And let's not forget the fashion. Everyone wore wool. Layered wool. Unwashed, infested, centuries-old wool. Wool was basically a 5-star flea hotel, with free breakfast, blood buffet included. It held moisture. It held warmth. It held secrets. Every seam was a potential flea condo. And of course, the more layers you wore, the more privacy the fleas had. Some people walked around with entire ecosystems thriving beneath their doublets. Sometimes you hear someone across the village shout, "I caught one." It's like hearing someone found gold. You look over. Sure enough, your neighbor is triumphantly pinching something between his fingernails, eyes gleaming with pride. He holds it up like a trophy. It's a flea. Dead. Congratulations. You have won nothing. The flea's thousands of siblings are already in your socks, planning a coup. Now, let's talk about plague. Because at this point in the conversation, it would be rude not to. You've heard whispers. You've seen the rats. You know the legends that somewhere far away, maybe Genoa, maybe Constantinople, ships have brought death, black swellings, fevers, whole cities emptied out. And that the real enemy isn't the rats or even the sick, it's the fleas. Because these particular fleas don't just itch. They kill. The bubonic plague spreads through the bites of infected fleas, mostly Xenophilicopies, which sound like a Harry Potter spell but is in fact a death sentence in insect form. These little monsters hop from rat to human to human, sinking their disgusting little beaks into you and injecting a cocktail of bacteria so evil it could have been brewed in a medieval apothecary with a grudge. Symptoms? You don't want to know. But you do know. Because you've seen it. It starts with the bites. Then the fever. Then the swelling. Then well, let's just say you've developed a healthy respect for any bug that's small that can topple a continent. So, naturally, you try to avoid them. Good luck. You can fumigate your home. Fill it with smoke from burning herbs. Hang dried lavender and rosemary in the rafters. Sprinkle ash along the doorways like you're warding off vampires. And the fleas still laugh. In Latin. Sometimes, people try more extreme methods. Rubbing tar onto their bodies. Bathing in stale wine. Wrapping themselves in red cloth to confuse the fleas. None of it works. You once met a man who claimed if you wore a necklace made of garlic, onions, and dead toads, the fleas would stay away. They didn't. But people did. So that was nice. Now you get dressed for the day, a painful process involving a lot of wool, some leather, and absolutely no hygiene, and prepare to live another itchy, bumpy, plague-adjacent day. But the worst part? It's not even the pain. It's not even the risk of death. It's the sound. The sound of a flea hopping through your ear in the middle of the night. It's the feeling of movement in your hair when you know, no, you didn't invite anyone. It's the sight of a black dot on your blanket, just sitting there, mocking you. You consider naming it. You consider burning your mattress. You consider joining a monastery just to sleep on cold stone and feel nothing. But you do none of those things. Because it's life. It's medieval life. And the fleas? They're just part of the package. So you scratch your ankle. You stare into the gray sky. And you get on with it. Because at least you think it can't get any worse. But then you feel something buzzing. Something in your ear. Something loud. Something winged. You're eating. Or at least trying to. It's late summer, which means the food is extra questionable. Bread, stale. Cheese, fuzzy. Meat, grayish. And just as you're bringing a spoonful of lentil mush to your mouth, it happens. A fly lands in your bowl. Not near it. Not beside it. In it. Direct hit. You stop mid-bite. You stare at the fly. It stares back. You blink first. You wave your hand gently. It leaves. But only after stepping in every single part of your meal. It probably just came from someone else's chamber pot, paused on a corpse, and then decided your lentils looked like a nice place to stretch its legs. You scoop the fly out. You eat anyway, because this is your life. Flies are part of every meal, part of every breath, part of the ecosystem that is your home, which is mostly wood, thatch, smoke, and regret. They're in the air, on your food, under your nails. They hum around your ears. They land on your forehead and rub their front legs together like they're scheming. You slap one. It escapes. You slap your own face. You apologize to yourself. Welcome to fly season, also known as every season. There are no windows, just holes in the wall with wooden shutters. Screens won't be invented for several hundred years, and glass is expensive, and you're not royalty. So the air flows freely. And so do the flies. Big ones, small ones, black, green, blue. The shiny ones that look like they're wearing armor. The dull ones that make that low, demonic buzzing sound right by your ear the moment you lie down to nap. But before we go too far down the buzzing rabbit hole, if you're still awake and somehow enjoying this descent into medieval insect misery, I'd love it if you liked the video and subscribed. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Especially if you're currently battling a fly in real time. Now, where were we? Yes. The buzzing. You're used to it by now. In the morning, the first sound you hear isn't the rooster. It's the slow, lazy hum of flies circling the rafters. In the afternoon, they descend like guilt. By evening, your house is practically vibrating. You've developed techniques. Waving your hand, shaking a stick, yelling at them, begging them, naming them. You once named one Thomas. Thomas sat on your bread and refused to leave for 45 minutes. He died eventually, in your soup. You drank the soup anyway. The flies are drawn to everything: open wounds, food scraps, feces, damp cloth, sick people, dead people, slightly sweaty people, and that one bucket in the corner that everyone keeps pretending isn't a toilet. That's where they thrive. The medieval home was not sterile. It was not clean. It was not even trying. Most of your food was stored out in the open. Your garbage pile was the backyard. Your outhouse, if you were lucky enough to have one, was just a hole with dreams. And flies? Flies love that. They lay eggs in it. Thousands. If you've never seen a pile of medieval offal writhing with maggots under the July sun, then congratulations. Your imagination is still intact. But here, in this sleepy medieval village, that's just Tuesday. You've walked past a tannery before. You remember the smell, a mix of death, salt, and vengeance. And the flies? Biblical. They swarm in clouds. Land on your face. Get in your eyes. Crawl up your nose if you sit still too long. And this isn't an exaggeration. There are medieval texts describing flies crawling into people's ears and laying eggs. Sleep tight. You swat one off your arm. It lands on your lip. You inhale sharply. Too sharply. Now it's in your mouth. You gag. Spit. Look around. No one cares. Because this happens to everyone. Some people even believe that flies are a punishment, a divine irritation, a test of faith, or, in one very creative theory from a 13th century monk, a physical manifestation of temptation. Sure. Why not? You're definitely tempted to scream. But instead, you do what everyone else does, live with it. Monks in monasteries tried everything. Hanging bundles of herbs, burning incense, rubbing themselves with vinegar. Nothing worked. One abbey actually tried training cats to chase the flies. It failed. The cats got bored, probably unionized. And nobles? They had servants with fans. Literal people who just stood by and waved flies away while the Lord ate his questionable roast. It didn't help. It just made the flies mad. And, of course, there's the whole flies and death thing. You've been to a funeral before. Not like modern ones. No embalming. No seal casket. Just a body, wrapped in cloth, sometimes sprinkled with herbs, sometimes just there, laid out, waiting to be buried, or waiting to do some decomposing. And the flies? Oh, they notice immediately. They arrive before the mourners. Sometimes they arrive before the person actually dies. They hover. They crawl. They whisper things in buzzing tones that sound vaguely like Latin. You know what it means when the flies start gathering around someone's mouth. It means it's time to say goodbye. And the worst part? Sometimes the flies get into you. There's a word for it. Meiosis. It's when fly larvae burrow into flesh. You once heard of a mun who left a wound untreated too long. It became a maggot hotel. He survived. Barely. But he never smiled again. You shudder. Not from fear. Just muscle memory. Because even now, lying here in the soft, itchy half-sleep of your candlelit room, you can hear them, buzzing. Somewhere nearby. Maybe near the food scraps in the corner. Maybe near the goat. Maybe near your ear. You wrap your head in cloth. It doesn't help. You light a candle. It draws more. You whisper a prayer. The flies answer in unison. They rub their horrible little legs together like they're plotting to overthrow your sanity. And so, you lie back, resigned. This is life. This is dinner. This is bedtime. This is medieval peace. You hear the buzzing. You feel the crawling. You know, deep down, that you will wake up with a fly print on your cheek. You accept it. Because there is no escape. Not from lice. Not from bedbugs. Not from fleas. And certainly not from the humming insect choir that fills your home, your dreams, and your daily soup. Sweet dreams. You're trying to sleep. Trying being the key word here. But you can't. Because something just flew by your ear. It made a sound. That sound. That high, thin, whining buzz. Like a tiny violin made of malice and intent. You swat at the air. Mississippi. Of course. You hold perfectly still. Listening. Silence. For a moment, you believe you imagined it. You did not. The buzzing returns directly into your ear canal, like it wants to file a complaint. You throw off your blanket in a fit of rage. You sit up, candle still flickering weakly in the corner. You scan the shadows. Nothing. But you know it's here. Mosquitoes are stealthy. Unlike fleas, they don't bounce. Unlike lice, they don't crawl all over your scalp and whisper bedtime horrors. Mosquitoes hover. They watch. They wait until you're still. Vulnerable. Delicious. You lie back down. And wait for the inevitable. Somewhere nearby, in the fetid warmth of your medieval home, a mosquito is preparing to ruin your night, again. Because, in case you forgot, you live in a bog-adjacent nightmare zone. It's summer. It's humid. The air smells like sheep, sweat, and sins. And right outside your door, a swamp. Not a poetic one. Not a scenic wetland full of birds and serenity. No, this is a real medieval swamp. Home to frogs the size of guilt, water blacker than your dreams, and clouds of mosquitoes thick enough to choke a cow. You've walked through it before. Just once. A mistake. You came out looking like a raisin that had been lightly tenderized with a fork. And then the fever hit. Because let's not forget, these mosquitoes don't just itch. They kill. In some regions, especially southern Europe, swampy river valleys, and anywhere remotely marshy, mosquitoes were vectors for malaria. Of course, you don't know the word malaria. You call it the swamp fever. Or the ague. Or God's punishment for not washing enough, depending on how dramatic your local priest is. It starts with chills. Then heat. Then shaking. Then, if you're lucky, a day or two of wild, hallucinatory rambling before you recover. If you're not lucky, well, your grave will be dug by someone who already has 3 mosquito bites on their forehead. There's no real cure. Just treatments, poppy for the pain, quinine bark if you're rich or own a desperate botanist. Otherwise, you just sweat it out. Literally. So yes, you fear mosquitoes. You do not respect them. You do not admire them. But you fear them. You've seen what they can do. You've seen an entire village lose half its people in one summer, and the only explanation anyone had was, the air is angry. And in a way, they were right. Malaria. Bad air. That's what they called it. The idea that swampy, stinking air carried disease. And you know what? It kinda does. Every breath out there feels like sipping a warm sock. But back to your bed. You're lying under a thin linen cloth. Some people hang netting, if they can afford it. You cannot. You tried making some once, from old cheesecloth and despair. The mosquitoes laughed. They bit you through it. You tried rubbing garlic on your skin. You smelled like regret. You tried drinking vinegar. The mosquitoes still bit you. Now you're itchy and nauseous. You even prayed. Out loud. The mosquito hovered over your prayer book. You swear it nodded. Now, fun fact, female mosquitoes are the ones that bite. Males feed on nectar, which is sweet and lovely. Females, on the other hand, feed on your blood because they need it to make eggs. Yes, eggs. You are a protein smoothie for a future generation of flying demons. That's the cycle. They hatch their eggs in still water, and that's a problem, because medieval Europe is basically 50% still water. Every bucket, every puddle, every ditch, every chamber pot that didn't get dumped far enough away. All of it, mosquito nurseries. And of course, sanitation in your world is, how shall we put this, enthusiastic but ineffective. You dump your slop out the window. You store your rainwater in open barrels. You wash your face in a basin that hasn't been cleaned since Lent. Every time you refill something, a mosquito sees it as a maternity ward. And they're fast. A mosquito can hatch in as little as 48 hours. You blink, and the bucket is full of squiggling larvae doing backflips in filth. You stop counting the number of times you've accidentally swallowed one while drinking water at dusk. You call them protein. You lie to yourself. The church has no official position on mosquitoes. Probably because even God is tired of them. But there are local folk remedies. You remember one old woman who swore by burning cow dung. It produced smoke, which drove away the bugs. It also drove away people, animals, joy, and the will to live. Another neighbor tried rubbing herself with mashed onions. She still got bitten, but her husband stopped asking her to churn butter, so maybe it worked. And then, there's the mud bath technique. You saw it once, a shepherd, naked but for a loincloth, completely covered in swamp mud. He claimed it blocked the bites. He also smelled like fermented sadness. So you pass. Instead, you just suffer. Like everyone else. You wake up with red bumps in places you didn't know had skin. Your ankles, your wrists, your earlobes. One on your eyelid. How did it even get there? You slap your face by instinct. It's too late. She's already gone. Probably laying eggs in the trough out back. Naming them after your ancestors. You light another candle. Not because it helps, but because it makes you feel slightly in control of something. The mosquito dances in the corner, casting a tiny, demonic shadow. You whisper threats. She whispers back. You reach for a cloth and wrap it around your head. You breathe slowly. You remind yourself it's not forever. Just until winter. But until then, every night is a slow-motion battle between you, a tiny vampire, and your slowly unraveling sense of peace. Eventually, you drift off. Not into real sleep. Into medieval sleep. Which is really just a light, itchy trance full of buzzing dreams and paranoid flinching. Because in a world without bug spray, air conditioning, or basic justice, the mosquito always wins. But hey, at least the fleas get the night off. You're awake. Or you think you are. Your eyes are closed, but you're scratching your neck. Then your shoulder. Then your leg. Then your neck again. Something's crawling on you. You can't see it. But it's there. You feel it. Tiny. Persistent. Committed to its art. You sit up, lift the blanket, and squint. Nothing. But still, something. That's the thing about medieval mites. You never see them coming. Because you can't. They are too small, too determined, too everywhere. They're in your bedding, your clothes, your eyebrows. Yes, your eyebrows. And if you're truly lucky, your eyelashes. Congratulations. You're now the proud host of Demodex folliculorum, a microscopic skin mite that lives in your pores, feeds on your sebum, and reproduces in the hair follicles of your face. And yes, this was happening in the Middle Ages. And no, they didn't know. They just thought it was a greasy rash, or bad humors, or a punishment for vanity. Because if your cheeks were inflamed, red, and flaky, obviously it meant you were arrogant about your bone structure and God decided to punish you with a face full of invisible livestock. You rub your cheeks now. Hard. It doesn't help. There's no microscope. No antibacterial soap. No clue. So what do? Well, you turn to the two great forces of medieval problem solving. Boil it. Blame it on sin. You've tried boiling your sheets. That helped. For an hour. Then you slept in the same tunic you wore to dig ditches and wrestle pigs and eat stewed cabbage. Mites returned. Stronger. Bolder. You went to the local healer once. She looked at your arm rash and nodded solemnly, as if it were a scroll from the heavens. Then she told you to smear lard mixed with ashes across your body and sleep standing up. You tried it. You woke up horizontal, sweaty, and still itchy. But at least now you also smelled like a candle made of disappointment. Now, let's talk scabies. Not a fun topic. Not even remotely soothing. But we're doing this because it's bedtime, and nothing says sweet dreams like microscopic parasites burrowing into your skin to lay eggs. Scabies is caused by Sarcoptes scabii, a mite that digs little tunnels under the skin and lays its eggs in your epidermis. Yes, tunnels. Yes, eggs. Yes, yours. It spreads easily, especially in close quarters. So, the entire medieval world. You live with 6 people in a one-room house. You share blankets, benches, food, and oxygen. And when someone gets scabies, everyone gets scabies. You remember the first time. A burning itch between your fingers. Then your wrist. Then a rash, red, crusty, unholy. The itch grew worse at night, of course. Because the mites are nocturnal. Like tiny skin-obsessed vampires with no regard for your mental health. You scratched so hard you bled. Your neighbor told you to rub your skin with salt and honey. It stung. You screamed. The mites laughed. Eventually, you just accepted it. Because you had to. This is life in the itchy lane. Scabies outbreaks were common, particularly in poor, crowded areas. But also in monasteries, nunneries, barracks, anywhere people lived in close, blessed proximity to each other. You once visited a monastic guest house. Beautiful chanting. Lovely courtyard. Every monk scratching like he had fleas of the soul. Now, let's shift slightly to another invisible menace, the itch mite. Also known as the harvest mite. Also known as chiggers, in some places, centuries later. You walk through a meadow in late summer. Bare legs. Sun on your skin. You feel free. Alive. Connected to nature. But nature is plotting. Because nestled in the tall grass are microscopic orange-red larvae waiting to crawl onto your skin, pierce your flesh, and inject enzymes that turn your tissue into soup so they can slurp it up like a medieval milkshake. You don't feel it right away. Not until the next day. Then, the welts. Huge. Red. Angry. You scratch. And scratch. And scratch. They last for weeks. You try bathing in vinegar. Then goat's milk. Then just crying. Nothing helps. The itch is eternal. You now fear grass. All grass. Forever. And then there are ticks. Not microscopic, but close enough. And deeply unpleasant. Unlike the poetic, buzzing irritation of mosquitoes or the slinky, blood-sucking charm of fleas, ticks are more like the squat, silent villains of the insect world. You never hear them coming. You don't even feel the bite. You just notice them later. Usually after a long day of foraging or hunting or lying in a field wondering if God has favorites. You come home. Start undressing. And there it is. Stuck to your ankle. Or your side. Or, If you've truly offended the heavens, your armpit, you panic. You poke it. It doesn't move. You pull. It resists. You pray. It laughs. You finally wrench it off with a stick. Half of it stays in. You get an infection. Your body swells. Your friends ask if you've been cursed. You say, yes, by a beetle with a syringe for a mouth. Ticks were everywhere. In the forests. On animals. On people who went near animals. There were even folk remedies for them. You remember your uncle once suggesting burning them off with a candle. He succeeded in removing the tick, and part of his leg hair, and the concept of personal dignity. You've also heard of people smearing butter on them to coax them out. That never worked. It just made the tick greasy and slightly more aerodynamic. And the worst part? Ticks carry disease too. The most feared? Milksick or meadow fever. Unexplained joint pain, swelling, red rashes, sudden exhaustion. Some said it was witches. Others said it was the wind. Turns out, it was ticks with an agenda. And let's not forget ear mites. Yes, in your ears. Crawling, tickling, living their microscopic best lives in the warm cavern of your medieval hearing holes. You felt it. That eerie movement. Like a feather brushing against your eardrum. You slap the side of your head like you're trying to knock out a bad thought. Nothing. The movement continues. You once poured garlic oil in there. Didn't fix the problem. But it did make your head smell like an Italian guilt spiral. Eventually, it stopped. Or you just got used to it. Hard to say. And now, as you lie in bed, itching softly, listening to the sound of the fire crackling and the faint scratch of someone in the next bed giving in to the same invisible torment, you accept the truth. There is no such thing as truly clean skin. Not in this century. Not in your class. Not in your village. You are a walking ecosystem. A host. A buffet. And the mites? They are always invited. You scratch again. Then sigh. Then settle deeper into the straw mattress that hasn't been cleaned since your grandmother's christening. You breathe in. Smells like sheep, mildew, and future rash. You close your eyes. The itching fades. Not because it's gone, but because your brain has finally accepted it as normal. This is peace. This is sleep. This is your medieval life. You're outside. The sun is shining. The birds are singing. You have chores to do. Always chores. You're gathering kindling, or fetching water, or helping someone's ox get unstuck from a ditch, again. And just as you start to enjoy the rare warmth on your face, something ruins everything. It buzzes by your ear like a tiny demon joyriding on a paper airplane. It's too fast to see, too loud to ignore. You freeze. Slowly turn your head. And there it is. A wasp. Hovering. Watching. Judging. Why is it here? Why does it care? You have no food, no flowers, no reason to be interesting. But it wants you anyway. You try not to panic. You remember your father's words, if you don't move, it won't sting you. Then you remember your father was stung on the eye last spring while holding perfectly still during morning prayers. So much for that theory. The wasp darts closer. You do what any reasonable peasant would do. You flail wildly, shriek like a baby goat, and sprint into a hedge. The wasp follows you halfway, then disappears, off to ruin someone else's afternoon. You stumble out of the thorns, covered in scratches, dignity leaking from your ears. Just another peaceful day in the medieval countryside. Now, here's the thing about stinging insects in your world. They're not just annoying. They're dangerous. There's no EpiPens. No antihistamines. No hospitals. You get stung in the neck? Hope your priest knows the short version of last rites. Because allergic reactions were real, even then, they just weren't called allergies. They were called the sudden puffining followed by choking and regret. Sometimes people swelled up. Sometimes they passed out. Sometimes they died. And no one knew why. They just said things like, "'Twas a curse from the sky." He was stung in the leg and died of the head. The Lord needed another choir boy, and so the bees were dispatched. Speaking of bees, let's not drag them through the honey just yet, because bees were actually kind of important. In fact, bees were one of the few insects you didn't try to murder on sight. You needed bees, not just for honey, which was the closest thing you had to candy, antiseptic, and depression treatment, all in one sticky jar. But also for wax. Because if you were lucky enough to own a candle, it was probably made of beeswax, smooth, clean-burning, and only slightly ruinous to obtain. If you were less lucky, your candle was made of tallow, which is boiled animal fat. It worked. It also smelled like someone tried to set a meat pie on fire and failed. So, beeswax candles were prized. And bees were kept. Enter the medieval beekeeper. A terrifying job held by a brave few who voluntarily interacted with angry clouds of wing pain. They wore no protective suits, no veils, no gloves, just a tunic, a prayer, and enough emotional detachment to ignore the buzzing death swirl inches from their face. Hives were made from woven straw, shaped like domes. They were called skeps. And harvesting honey was violent. You didn't just ask the bees. You smoked them out, cracked open the hive, stole their food, and ran away before they regrouped. Sometimes you'd even kill the whole hive. Not maliciously, just out of convenience. You see, in your world, efficiency often looked like cruelty. And the bees? They were just collateral damage in the quest for sweet toast topping and vaguely medicinal tea additives. But let's get back to the bad guys, wasps and hornets. Unlike bees, these stingers don't die after one hit. No, they're repeat offenders. Serial stabbers. They can, and will, sting you multiple times just to prove a point. And they love dark corners, barns, outhouses, the inside of your bonnet. You remember the day you stuck your hand into a woodpile and pulled out a wasp nest the size of your self-esteem. You ran so fast you tripped over your own shadow. They chased you anyway. You spent the rest of the week with a swollen hand that looked like a roasted turnip and smelled like salve and shame. Now, you might be wondering, what did people do about these creatures? How did they defend themselves? Well, here are some of the more imaginative methods from your time. 1. Burn everything. Find a nest, torch it. No questions asked. This method worked about 50% of the time, assuming you didn't also accidentally torch your fence, your neighbor's shed, or your remaining sense of hope. 2. Throw water. Some believed soaking a nest with cold water would cool their fury. This sometimes worked. Other times, it resulted in 37 very wet, very angry wasps declaring war on your family. 3. Spells. Yes. Magical incantations. One popular medieval charm involved whispering sacred words into a hollow gourd and having it near the hive. Results were mixed. Mostly you got a wet gourd and more stings. 4. Garlic and onions. Because when in doubt, the medieval solution to everything was rub something that smells horrible on it. You once rubbed mashed leeks behind your ears to repel flying evils. The wasp stung you anyway, possibly out of spite. 5. Let the bees tell your secrets. This one's not even about prevention, it's just weird. In parts of Europe, people believed bees needed to be informed of family news. Births, deaths, weddings, all whispered to the hive. Fail to do this, and the bees would get offended. They might leave, or die, or just become passive-aggressive and make bitter honey. You once told your bees that your brother got married. They stung your brother the next day. You're still not sure if it was coincidence or judgment. But let's not forget the worst offenders in this sting-filled menagerie. Hornets. Massive, loud, arrogant. Hornets are the medieval version of a flying sports car, loud for no reason and full of misplaced aggression. Their nests were built in eaves, trees, or, if you were particularly unlucky, inside your thatched roof. You'd be lying in bed, listening to the wind. Then, a low drone. Not the bee kind, the bigger kind. You'd sit up and stare at the ceiling. There, hanging just above your bed, a papery nest the size of your chamber pot. You don't sleep that night, or the next. Eventually, you move. You leave the hornets the house. You start over. You build a new hut out of mud and fear 3 fields away. And they still find you. Because hornets don't care about your boundaries, your mental health, or your lease agreement. So you adapt. You learn to live with stings, to flinch at every buzz, to walk softly in gardens and breathe gently near fruit. Because fruit attracts wasps. And wasps ruin everything. Eventually, you grow accustomed. You get stung less. Or maybe you just stop reacting. Your nervous system gives up. You're now the kind of person who gets stung in the arm, shrugs, and goes back to stirring cabbage. This is medieval resilience. Or medieval numbness. Same thing, really. And so, as the candle flickers, and you drift off into a dream full of angry buzzing and passive-aggressive bees, you take comfort in knowing one thing. You are not alone. Every medieval person you've ever known has been stung. Some cried. Some screamed. Some composed ballads of vengeance. But all of them, eventually, fell asleep. Just like you. Itchily. Grumpily. And probably on a pillow full of hay and old honeycomb. Buzz, buzz. Sleep tight. If you've been waiting for the truly stomach-turning part of the story, congratulations. This is the one where we talk about insect-based remedies, bug juice potions, and magical poultices made from things that squirm. So, cozy up. Settle in. Breathe slowly through your mouth, because I'm about to describe smells that might haunt your dreams. This is the part of medieval life where your doctor is also your butcher, your apothecary is a part-time beekeeper, and the cure for your rash might be more insects. Let's begin with the basics. You wake up in the middle of the night. Again, you're itchy. Not just regular itchy. You're I think I have beetles in my brain itchy. You stumble to the hearth, light a bit of tallow on a string, and check your body. It's not good. You've got red blotches. Your skin is flaking in ways that shouldn't be biologically possible. And there's movement. Tiny, black movement. You've got mites. Or lice. Or fleas. Or possibly all three, having a little vermin banquet in your armpits. You need help. But you're in the 14th century. Which means the nearest physician is a 5-hour walk away, costs more than your entire cow, and believes that your condition is caused by too much melancholy and unbalanced humors. So, you do what most people did. You go to the local wise woman or herbalist or hedge doctor. And she's got just the thing. A poultice made of mashed herbs, warm ash, and crushed beetles. Because, of course, she calls it a balm of 7 legs. You don't want to know why. But you're desperate. And when she smears it on your skin, it's warm. And crawling. You scream. She tells you that means it's working. You're not sure if that's reassuring or a threat. Let's take a brief pause to do something very important before we go further into this horrifying chapter. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. I'm not here to trick the algorithm. I'm here to keep you cozy, curious, and vaguely horrified. And while you're at it, drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing who else is lying awake thinking about antique bug salves. It's strangely comforting. All right, back to the crawling ointment. One of the most respected insect-based cures in medieval times was, wait for it, maggots. Yes, the larvae of flies. Little wriggling blobs of soft despair. And believe it or not, this is one of the rare times when medieval medicine was right. You see, maggots eat dead tissue. Only dead tissue. So when you had a wound that was turning black and oozing like a cursed jelly jar, someone would, lovingly, place maggots inside it. And they would eat the rot. And leave the healthy parts alone. Modern medicine even rediscovered this. It's called maggot debridement therapy today. So yes, sometimes medieval people were ahead of the curve. Unfortunately, the maggots usually weren't placed hygienically. You didn't get sterile gauze or lab-grown larvae. You got a guy named Aldrich who pulled them out of a cow carcass and slapped them on your leg with a stick. So it was a bit of a gamble. You might survive. Or you might become Aldrich's next experiment. Another fan favorite in medieval bug medicine was powdered lice. Yes, ground-up lice. Mixed with vinegar or milk, then rubbed on the body. It was believed to help with, ironically, lice infestations. This is like fighting fire with fire. Except the fire is sentient and biting you. In some regions, especially the Middle East and parts of North Africa during the early Islamic Golden Age, there were more scientific approaches. Scholars like Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, wrote about insect behavior and linked infestations to hygiene, bedding, and even seasonal changes. But in most of Europe, lice were seen as divine punishment or moral failings. And the cure? Still bug juice. You once met a friar who recommended boiling dead lice in goat urine, then using the liquid as a shampoo. You tried it once. Your scalp never itched again. Mostly because you lost all your hair. Beetles were also common in medieval medicine. The Spanish fly, a type of blister beetle, was dried, ground into powder, and sold as an aphrodisiac. But in reality, it caused blistering, vomiting, internal bleeding, and possibly death. So you die feeling very aroused. And very, very wrong. People applied this beetle powder to the skin to draw out infections. But mostly, it just created new blisters to distract you from the original wound. A classic medieval move: if one part of your body is failing, damage a different part to shift focus. Bleeding from the ear? Smash your knee. Headache? Drill a hole in the skull. Rash? Apply beetle powder and scream. And then there were the spiders. Not technically insects, but let's not get pedantic. Spider webs were used as a kind of bandage. They were sticky, fibrous, and surprisingly effective at stopping bleeding. But, and this is crucial, they were often collected from live spider nests. Meaning, yes, you had to reach into a corner full of arachnids, harvest their home, and hope nobody bit you. You can still remember the feeling. Your hand disappearing into shadow. The web sticking to your skin. The slight twitch of something crawling away just as you pull back. Congratulations. You've successfully obtained a medieval band-aid. Now wrap it around your wound and ignore the legs poking out. Let's not forget about ants. In some African and Asian cultures, soldier ants were used as natural stitches. You let them bite the two edges of a wound closed, then snapped off the body, leaving the jaws locked in place. Nature's sutures. Brilliant. Horrifying. Effective. Europe, however, mostly ignored this genius idea and continued with goose grease, cobwebs, and whispered prayers. Because science is scary, and ants are suspicious. Occasionally, you'd hear stories of butterflies being used in magical healing. No, not ground up. That would be too rational. Instead, it was believed that seeing a butterfly land on a sick person was a sign of recovery. So people would catch butterflies and release them in sick rooms, hoping one would land and bless the patient. This sounds sweet. Until you realize how many exhausted butterflies were shoved into dark chambers full of feverish, coughing peasants. They probably died of despair. Just like the leech in your uncle's armpit. Ah yes, the leech. While not an insect, leeches were the blood-sucking superstar of medieval medicine. They weren't feared. They were hired. They were your part-time physicians. You'd get a headache, they'd put a leech on your temple. You had a fever, one on your ankle. Bad dreams? One on the belly button. Nothing wrong at all? Great. Time for preventive leeching. That's where they suck out blood just in case you were going to have a problem later. It was the medieval version of antivirus software. Only much more oozy. Let's shift briefly to bed bugs. Yes, the tiny mattress ghouls. Nobody liked them. Nobody cured them. But some people tried. One 15th century herbalist swore that boiling bed bugs with fennel and spraying the mixture on your sheets would make them leave. Spoiler, it didn't. But your bed now smelled like licorice and regret. And finally, there were the mystical cures. Some people believed that carrying a live insect in your pocket would draw illness away from the body. You once carried a beetle in a pouch for 3 weeks. When you got better, you released it into the woods and thanked it. When you didn't get better, you stepped on it and found another beetle. That's medieval science. Equal parts hope, superstition, and aggressive bug collection. So here you are now, curled in bed, covered in a poultice that may or may not include parts of a grasshopper. You've got spider silk on one elbow, a leech on your thigh, and a little jar of lice powder next to your pillow, just in case. The candle flickers, the shadows shift, and you drift off, slowly, dreaming of butterflies, praying they don't land on your mouth. This time, we head to the place where hunger, desperation, and poor life choices intersect beautifully, the medieval kitchen. Yes, we're talking about eating insects. On purpose. Welcome to cuisine in the age of fleas, where seasoning is a luxury, rats are optional, and the term crunchy protein takes on a whole new meaning. Let's begin with a familiar feeling. You wake up. Again. It's barely dawn. The cock hasn't even crowed yet. You check the time but, well, that technology doesn't exist yet. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten in a day and a half. Yesterday's barley stew tasted like swamp water and depression. And there's nothing left in the larder except a questionable turnip and something that might be either a raisin or a dried mouse dropping. You head to the kitchen, because that's what humans do when faced with emotional ruin. We snack. But in medieval times, snacks weren't made of air-fried chickpeas and oat milk. They were made of desperation, bugs, and prayer. Let's begin with a little-known fact. Some medieval folks didn't just tolerate insects, they ate them on purpose. Now, before you judge them, remember, there is no Uber Eats. There is no fridge. There is no gas stove. There is no store. There is only you, a clay pot, and a disturbing number of things crawling inside it. So what did people do? They got creative. In parts of Europe, especially southern regions where winters were slightly less homicidal, insects were seen as a last resort protein source. And sometimes, a delicacy. Let's talk about the woodlouse. Yes, the Aurelia poly, the pill bug, that tiny armored crustacean that curls into a ball when poked. In some medieval medical texts, crushed woodlice were prescribed for stomach issues. But peasants took it a step further. When dried and toasted, they provided a slightly salty crunch. And if your dinner has no salt, no meat, and no joy, then one crunchy bug can really brighten your day, especially when it doesn't crawl back up. So before we get too deep into bug tapas, let me remind you of something very important. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, no guilt, no crunchy insects hidden in your next bowl of stew. Just peaceful, slow, sarcastic history. And drop a comment, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I'm always curious who else is up at 3 a.m. contemplating beetle broth and spider soup. Now, where were we? Yes, the stew. You peek inside the pot. Something moves. It's not the wind. It's something with legs. And you sigh, because you know that if you want to eat tonight, you're going to have to stop caring about the number of legs your food has. Some bugs were accidentally eaten. Like flour beetles. If you ground your grain by hand, and most people did, there was no way to keep tiny bugs from infesting your flour. Flour beetles laid their eggs in it. Larvae wriggled through it. Adults died in it. And you bake with it anyway. Because you were not about to waste a precious sack of grain just because it had some protein sprinkles in it. So yes, your bread had bugs. Your porridge had bugs. And if you were lucky, you didn't find them until after you'd eaten. Let's talk about cheese mites. A delicacy. Sort of. Some cheeses, especially aged varieties, develop colonies of tiny mites. People would carve off the top layer, eat the rest, and pretend nothing ever happened. Some people, however, embraced the mites. They wanted them. There are stories, possibly exaggerated, but let's be honest, that's kind of the theme of this whole video, of nobles eating cheese that was actively writhing. Because it was extra ripe. You, a peasant, couldn't afford cheese. But you've seen the Lord eat it with a fork and a smirk while bugs crawled over the rind like they were throwing a dance party. You're not sure if you're disgusted or jealous. Now let's journey to the Middle East, where locusts weren't just a plague, they were a snack. In many cultures, especially in arid regions, locusts were, and still are, collected, dried, salted, and eaten. High protein, crunchy, slightly nutty. The Bible even mentions them. John the Baptist famously lived on locusts and wild honey. So you, being creative, try it. You catch a few grasshoppers, toast them over the fire, dip them in a bit of honey stolen from the hives behind the monastery. And honestly, not bad. It's crunchy, it's sweet, and it's not gruel. You consider opening a food cart. But then you remember that street food isn't invented yet. Also, carts are expensive. And you don't have shoes. Insects were also sometimes used in beverages. Not intentionally, at first. But barrels of ale or wine left in warm cellars often attracted flies, gnats, and beetles. And since filtering wasn't really a thing, you just drank around them. Or swallowed them whole. Either way, it was a bonding experience. But more interestingly, some medicinal tonics included insects deliberately. Beetle powder was mixed into wine for stimulation. And extract was stirred into water for energy. And let's not forget the apothecary who claimed that a tincture of crushed centipedes cured fatigue. It didn't. But it did make you forget about your fatigue by replacing it with horror. There were also times when insects were considered taboo. In many Christian parts of Europe, eating bugs was seen as gross, sinful, or something only barbaric people did. Which, of course, didn't stop anyone from secretly doing it when things got rough. You know how it goes. It's the 13th century. It's winter. You haven't seen meat in 3 months. And suddenly, a big juicy beetle crawls across your fire pit. You look left. You look right. No priest in sight. So you skewer it with a stick, roast it until it pops, and pretend it was a mushroom. Problem solved. Salvation postponed. Let's talk accidental insect dishes again, because these were arguably more common. Your flour is infested. Your barley has tiny eggs. Your dried fruit is full of wriggling worms. But do you throw it out? Of course not. You cook it harder. The logic is simple. If it's cooked, it's safe. If it's crunchy, it's intentional. If it moves, you squish it mid-bite. You once boiled a pot of oats so long the spoon stood upright in it. You called it peasant polenta. You pretended the bugs were seasoning. You survived. Now, here's a fun little curveball. Some insects were kept as pets before becoming snacks. Children would collect caterpillars, beetles, even certain types of grubs. They'd name them. They'd race them. And sometimes, they'd eat them. Welcome to the circle of life, medieval edition. Where childhood is short, nutrition is scarce, and pets are also protein. Your neighbor's kid once brought home a giant beetle and named it Sir Clackles. 3 days later, he roasted it over a candle and said it tasted like almonds. You haven't looked at him the same since. Lastly, there was a belief that certain insects brought luck if consumed. Ladybugs, for instance, were considered symbols of protection. So some superstitious folks would eat one as a way to seal their luck before a journey. You tried it once. It tasted like soap and regret. You didn't get robbed on the road, but you did throw up behind a haystack, so the effectiveness is inconclusive. And so here you are, sitting in your dirt floor kitchen, a half-eaten turnip in your lap, a roasted grasshopper between your fingers. You chew slowly. The fire crackles. Something scurries under the table. And you no longer care. You are one with the bugs. They are in your food, your bed, your medicine, your soul. And honestly, they're the only consistent source of nutrition in your life. So you eat. You survive. And you accept that sometimes dinner bites back.